Right, hi everyone, just a further update on the GoPro Hero 4 versus the GoPro Hero 3 in terms of its 2x performance and certainly its frame rates. I've been getting a bit of stick on it on a couple of different sites here, but I'll do a bigger, more in-depth video while I'm working on it just now. And what it definitely seems is it doesn't matter whether you're shooting 720 or 1080, is once you go above 60 frames a second, the quality just is lost. You're getting serious aliasing going on, and it's not temporal and it's not spatial aliasing. It's what's happening is the camera is line binning or pixel binning, so it's getting rid of whole layers of the actual sensor. The odd thing is, I've said whenever I've put up the video saying, oh, image quality is reduced or destroyed by going to faster frame rates, people are saying, oh, duh, didn't you know that? I'm not talking about noise, I'm not talking about like changes in color or depth, or color depth, or dynamic range or anything like that. I'm talking about the fact is, below 60 frames a second, you've got a clean video. Above 60 frames a second, you're suddenly getting these lines all through your images. It's also to the point, the next video you'll see, which is a bigger, more in depth with lots of little logos, the 720p at 60 frames a second is almost better than 1080p at a 90 or 120 frames a second. So the whole claim from GoPro saying 2x performance, what's happening is you're not necessarily getting 2x the... What I'm saying is I don't think you could mix 120, not even 120, 90 frames a second with 60 frames a second without a conscious viewer looking at it going, something's happened. If you change the rendering, or something gone wrong here if you change the resolution. I just did a quick video inside the office here again. I set in both PAL setting. Obviously once you go above 60 frames or above 50 frames a second, you're getting the light banding going on in the video. But I'm not looking at the banding, I'm not looking at the noise, I'm just looking at what happens to the actual resolution, the image quality that we get in the videos. And it's pretty bad. So the GoPro Hero 3 Plus Black Edition can go up to 60 frames a second and it's fine. The GoPro Hero 4 Black Edition can also go up to 60 frames a second and it's fine. Once you go above that, this is what happens. I'll show you on this video here, and then I'll just export this video which I'm doing just so you can see it for yourself. Look closely at the lines of this part of the board here. So it's a nice big board here, nothing spectacular, interesting there. If we go to the next frame, so that's with the GoPro Hero 3 at 50 frames a second, and then at 90 frames a second, okay, let's ignore the exposure change, let's ignore a bit of the noise. But if you look at the line, it's pretty difficult to see. And that happens quite a bit. And there's also, although I've just placed the cameras on top of each other, whenever you go above 60 frames a second, there's a change, a little shift in the actual image capture itself. So if you're trying to scale it up to be perfectly in the zone, it doesn't quite work. What I will also say is that the GoPro Hero 3 Plus Black Edition has the same effect at 720p when you go from 60 to 120 frames a second. It screws up as well. But GoPro is saying it can do 1080 at 120. There's something definitely going on here. So in this next shot, I've zoomed in, and apart from the bit where you're looking at noise and kind of just the things happening in the image, look at this line again up here. Now if I take the exposure or the opacity of that, you'll see, okay, apart from there's a slight angle, having the GoPros on top of each other is a little bit of they're balancing on their little bops there. But look at the image quality difference from there to that's the GoPro Hero 4. Okay, there's a little bit of noise from possibly increased ISO, but we're going from 50 to 90 frames a second, so not even half a stop's difference, and all of a sudden we're now getting these little diamond shapes instead of a lovely smooth line. So what I'm saying here is it really definitely looks like you can't mix 120 frames or 90 frames a second 1080p footage with 60 frames footage. My advice would possibly be is actually just use the 60 frames footage and use the GoPro Studio Flux thing. They've got this new thing where if you slow it down, they add a little bit of frame blending or frame composition inside. And there you can keep your quality of the resolution without getting this weird, disastrous aliasing, which is obvious even when it's compressed down, even when it is at on like almost on an iPhone, that you can actually see the difference in the final output. So something for all of you to be very much aware of. If you are buying it because your GoPro at 1080p, your GoPro Hero 3 Plus Black Edition at 1080p 60 frames a second was good, and you see the advert saying 2 times the performance and 1080p at 120 frames a second, be aware that if you try and mix these two files together, people are going to be able to easily spot, there's something different with one of those video files, and not just because of ISO, not just because of exposure, not because of temporal spatial aliasing, but because GoPro is doing some serious line binning, it looks like, going on here. So bigger video coming up with more in depth and more in details, and showing you the effect of 720p being destroyed or being better than the 1080 120 frames a second. So keep watching. Cheers. Bye bye. Additionally, I'd like to put in a counterclaim from some people saying I'm such an idiot for expecting it to be good quality, because going from 60 to 100 frames a second or 120 frames a second doesn't have any detrimental effects to the image if you're shooting in narrow. So all this issue is with wide, and for me, I'm never going to be shooting in narrow. Narrow is of no use to me whatsoever. Why would you buy an action cam and shoot in narrow? Bit of an odd one. And I've got the example here. So again, first shot, I'll put this at the end of the video. You'll also notice again, there is a size change with 1080 at 60p, which is this one, and then it becomes 1080 at 90 and then 120. 90, 120. Okay, if we ignore the kind of contrast and maybe a slight increase of noise or whatever, there's nothing, and slight white balance, there is a bit of a change of the actual scale, the resolution that we're getting, even though these are both in narrow. But the quality, I don't see as being bad. So here I've scaled them up so that they're at 1:1, so they're not squeezed to fit. The bottom one here, let's just remind myself, 1080p at 60 frames. So the bottom one is at 60 frames a second, and the top one, okay, there's a slight size difference, so I'm going to scale them up so that they're the same size. So on this one, if I make the top one 50% opacity, so I can see where they are, you can see like on the edges. So what I'll try and do is I'll make the bit in the middle here to be the same. Okay, and apart from obviously my head being in a different position, I think that's me got it as close as I'm going to get. So that's actually, I've squeezed it down to 96% the size. So it seems to be an actual bigger frame that we're getting. So 96% size, and I moved it down 3.3 pixels to get what looks like the same. There's a bit of an expanding going on there. But if we look carefully, I'm not seeing any degradation of image quality from 60 frames to 120 frames, from that's 60, that's 120. The actual resolution, everything here is looking fantastic. At no point am I looking at this going, obviously I've changed. So again, this isn't a case of, the camera can't do 120 frames a second. It can. It can do it very well, but only in narrow. It doesn't have a medium setting when you put it at 1080p at 120 frames a second either. So a lot of the arguments saying I'm an idiot, I didn't realize there's going to be a breakdown in image quality. There isn't. It's only whenever you're doing it at 1080p at wide that it looks gash. And now at 60 frames a second. And now at 60 frames a second. GoPro Hero 3 Plus Black Edition at 24 frames a second. GoPro Hero 3 Plus Black Edition 1080p 60 frames a second. GoPro Hero 3 Plus Black Edition 720p 60 frames a second. GoPro Hero 3 Plus Black Edition 720p 120 frames a second. GoPro Hero 3 Plus Black Edition 2.7K 30 frames a second. GoPro Hero 3 Plus Black Edition 720p 60 frames a second. Okay, so for this test I've got the GoPro Hero 3 Plus Black Edition at 1080p 50 frames a second, and I've got the GoPro Hero 4 at 1080p 90 frames a second. Both at wide settings, both not in Pro Tune, just normal settings. So we're going to have a look at their sharpness, just indoors. They're both set to PAL settings, so if that makes any difference as well. And let's just stick them right here. So the GoPro Hero 4 is on top, and the GoPro Hero 3 is below. Leave it there for a couple seconds, and let's go review. 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 Okay, done. 1080p at 60 frames a second at narrow settings, still in Pro Tunes at sharpness at medium. 1080p at 90 frames a second at narrow setting. 1080p at 120 frames a second at narrow, there isn't a medium setting. 1080p at 60 frames a second at narrow settings, still in Pro Tunes at sharpness at medium.